Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Visions and Voices. I'm John Stewart, partner here at Armanino, national leader of our family office industry. And I'm here today with an esteemed colleague and friend, Aaron Harris, CTO of Sage. Aaron, why don't you welcome yourself to the audience here? It's good to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always great to do stuff like this with Armanino. As John said, I'm the CTO of Sage. So my job is to kind of look out into the future, define a technology strategy and a vision that gives us the best possible future. And I think the exciting part of my job is then working with the engineers and the data scientists and the designers that are building, the building blocks, if you will, of that future. So it's a pretty exciting job. I'm probably best known as being a co-founder of Intacct. So this month is actually the 25th anniversary of the launch of the product.
Is it really? I didn't realize. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Oh, congratulations. I think it's rare too to have the CTO be consistent through that entire perspective. I mean, I know that wasn't the only role you ever had, but that's pretty cool.
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty unusual for CTO to stay in the same seat for as long as I have. CTOs tend to have short attention spans. So, I mean, the fun thing about this job has been, it's okay to have a short attention span because things move so fast.
Yeah, and that's the fun part. And I think it also speaks to the stability and the growth of the product itself because you're still at the helm of it. So, yeah, because you mix those people up, you get a lot of churn. You never know where that product goes at sometimes. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not. But in your case with Sage, it just continues to grow in the right direction. So that's fun.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I kind of remind people is the vision hasn't changed a whole lot. What's changed is our ability to execute on the vision. And some things are happening faster than I originally thought they would. Some things are taking a little longer, but generally speaking, we're pretty consistent on what we want to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think that's the nature of any product roadmap, right? Some things are going to speed up and flood, and no plan survives impact, that old saying, right? So, but I think it's good that, I mean, your leadership has actually shown through. And I'm excited to get into this today because I love the product. I know I see it a lot at our client base, at our end here at the family office end. And I'm excited with where you're going. And I want to talk some about that today and have you kind of walk us through it. But so let's start with, how is Sage evolving its technology stack to meet the growing needs of family offices, especially as we see they're becoming a little bit more like a PE shop, a little more institutional? How do you look at that? How do you kind of address it with your team?
Yep. So there's two big areas of investment for us. The first is AI, and I'm going to spend more time talking about that.
Sure.
The second is digital networks. I'll spend less time talking about that, but I think it's equally important. And let me talk about digital networks first, so we can just get that out of the way. But the whole idea is that the world is going digital, right? The way we interact with customers and suppliers and stakeholders, banks, governments, right? It is all going digital, and that gives us a great opportunity to create digital connections across all these relationships and speed up things like interacting with a bank to reconcile, or filing taxes with a government, or interacting directly with an investor, stakeholder, constituent, you name it.
Right.
That's the future, right? Everything is getting digitized. Networks are the platform for that. And one of the big benefits of networks is that it creates the sort of scale of data flow, which enables us to build pretty awesome AI. And so that's really what I would want to spend more time talking about. We like to think of AI as coming in waves, and these waves are sort of building on each other. So don't think of, one is replacing the other. They build on each other.
Incrementally over top, I would say, right? Yeah. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So, the three waves that we talk about are the task-based AI wave, right? This is AI that does something very specific, like reading an invoice. Then we get into the generative AI phase, right? We now add the ability to use AI for tasks requiring human creation. We now have the ability to interact with the AI, which we didn't have prior to large language models, which are really powering this.
Yep.
And these two things together have really set the foundation for, I think, the most exciting wave, which is the agentic AI wave.
I agree. Yeah, that is an exciting one. Let's go into it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing is, these first two waves are super important for that, right? So an agentic AI system essentially is software that uses AI and other technologies to automate the work that would normally be done by a human. But what makes it so different is that prior to AI agents, we would have to stick little AI models into very well-defined, prescripted, strict, rigid workflows. And so it could do really powerful things, but only in the way that they were preordained to do them. With agents, we're actually now able to hand over a lot of the decision-making ability to, an AI large language model
Right.
that can essentially say, given this is my assignment, this is the job or the task that I've been given, and given a set of tools that I've been empowered with, how best do I go about, this particular problem or completing this task? So I talk about, invoices as an example a lot.
Yeah,
In
that's a good
task-based
one.
AI, right? We've got a
Yeah.
strict workflow. It can read an invoice, it can
Tactical work
categorize it.
procedures, these are ripe for this low hanging fruit in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Right. If we put an agent on this,
Yeah.
an agent could take the whole process end to end to paying the invoice, but it could also make decisions. Like, there was a purchase order for this invoice, and there's a couple of things that don't match. Do I think they're within tolerance, or should I reach out to the supplier to say, hey, what's going on here?
Right.
So, depending on how much tools you make available to these agents, they can do some really rich things, including interacting with humans or even other agents that are in systems.
Yeah, see, I think that's pretty exciting where this is going because I think it's taking this whole idea of, if you look at our previous working life was management by rule, we have to manage everything, right? But now we're kind of really talking about management by exception in so many ways because these technologies are taking that off the table. And you're really looking at the exceptions or the higher priority ones that you're like, okay, I'm going to have to put an eye on that. But the rest, as you said, you can let an agent kind of funnel that all the way through the process. Once you lay out the rules and procedures it needs to do, it's going to follow them. That's
Yeah.
a massive shift in how we work today.
Yeah, it actually it reminds me of a quote from a woman at Griffin's family office, BlackRock Citadel. Sorry, she's actually been in a couple family offices, so I will occasionally reach out to her to kind of get her thoughts on things, and she ends up giving me these really nice quotable things, and I talked to her about all the workflow and especially the like close processes, and what she said was due to a lack of technology, the end to end becomes something to do, not something to review. And that's fundamentally, I think, what's in the mind of everybody is how do we get out of that doing, that
Yeah.
repetitive work and really transition all of our time over to the reviewing, whether it's reviewing exceptions or reviewing insights that have become available,
You're
but really
more
taking
strategic
advantage
in
of that.
nature, essentially. Yeah. And it's the work we all like to probably do more of, essentially.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
don't know if I've ever run into him who says, I love doing bank reconciliations. I don't think that's something people really often
there
say.
are there are some weird people. There are some weird people who enjoy it.
There's true. There's probably some out there that are like, so no offense to them. If you're loving it, keep loving it. But there's ways to
But I,
automate.
but I, but I think what they enjoy is chasing down the exceptions, right? I think
Yeah,
that
that's
it's the
really what it
thrill
is.
of, yeah, it's the
The
thrill of
investigative
finding
work
out, here's what's
problem.
going on. Yeah.
Right, you're solving the problem, but and how great would it be if, hey, we could already isolate, here are the big problems you need to look into, the rest have already figured out. Like that's the beautiful part of this type of technology now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
okay, so
exactly.
in hearing that you're consulting Ken Griffin's team and stuff, so what other trends are you hearing from family offices that are kind of influencing your product roadmap or your strategy right now? What else do you hear in that space?
Well, so we're going through, I think, a pretty big transformation across the family office space where historically they've had to run an instance of QuickBooks or
Right,
Xero or, you name it for each one of their legal entities.
right, which is
And,
not an efficient way to do any of that in those products. Yeah,
no, 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 no. I mean, they're in different versions. They have different chart of accounts, right? They've got different
totally.
controls in place, different permissions, different security, you name it. And they've got some very manually intensive ways of consolidating, across these. And so, the thing that's really driving this sort of sea change in the way family offices use software is getting into a proper multi-entity, accounting product like Sage Intacct.
Right.
And once we sort of realized how appealing this was to our family office customers, the first one we really broke into was Ray Dalio's family office. I think they had something like 100 instances of QuickBooks, right?
I would imagine
And
it's silly to think someone of that type level of, I mean, financial. I mean, the guy's a leader in that industry, and he's sitting on QuickBooks with 100 instances, and you're like, that's the most inefficient way to do that.
yeah, I mean, this must have been 2015,
Yeah, it's a
2016. And
while
so
ago. Yeah.
he was a bit of a leader, in sort of making the change. But once you get your whole world, into one database, if you will,
Right.
while still maintaining all the separations that kept you in multiple instances in the past, suddenly everything goes faster. You've got quicker access to information. You're able to spend sort of less time on no value added work. And so we're at that phase now with family offices where we're focused on some of the more sophisticated requirements of the family offices. So we've been working on, partial ownership, for example.
Yeah, that comes up often. How do you split up the ownership, particularly once you get into multi-generational handoff? It gets even more wacky. Yeah.
Yep, yep. And then we consider to focus on automating all that tedious stuff that nobody likes to do. One of the things about family offices that I had to learn pretty early on was there's the same sort of focus on assurance and trust in a family office that there is in the corporate world, but it's a bit to a different end, right? It's sort of about protecting wealth and making sure that your wealth is being invested and deployed in ways that are true to your mission, right? What you want to accomplish.
Exactly.
And so at the same time that we make all these investments in automation, we're also making all these investments into assurance, right? So the vision one day is to have a world where AI just sort of understands what the mission is, understands what the wishes of the family are,
And
and you can start to and you can start to take down some of these controls that are rigid and tedious and add lots of work, and you have more rich audit trails than you had before, and you've got AI that's able to think quick and on the fly and get that human involved when there's a need for a review.
Yeah, no, I think that is the vision, and I think a lot of family offices will gravitate quickly to a world like that because it's just more efficient for them. It really speaks more to the outcomes they're looking for, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
usually
exactly.
a simplified use case in that regard. So, okay, that brings up another kind of interesting topic here of like, so how do you address building or integrating tools specifically for, let's say it's private equity, alts, real estate, philanthropic tracking that are crucial for family offices? Often they'll have a foundation or they're supporting other charities or they're involved in other private equity or real estate, either entities or relationships or investments. How do you look at the product that way? Because it is a very different space in that regard.
Yeah, I think what it fundamentally comes down to is investing in products that are open,
Yeah.
that have, we call them APIs, right? So the
Yeah.
ability for software to talk to software, and then working with the right, partners to connect these systems in a way where data is flowing seamlessly across them. But at the same time, it's also creating this environment where the data looks like it's one data set.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Is to the principle, is it look like one, right? Because the rest of it, how it
Right.
gets there doesn't necessarily matter. They don't care how we're making the sausage. They just care that it comes out at the end, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's kind of interesting here is this is something that's needed irrespective of what's happening with AI. But for AI for you to really get the full benefit of AI, you've got to
Yeah.
have those open integrated systems. AI can't, doesn't just work in a vacuum, right? It's got to
Right.
have tools to work with.
Right.
And so the more you can get these systems to be open and integrated, the more powerful that AI layer can be, especially once we get to the world of agents, right? And we want these agents to be able to, work
Yeah.
across various systems and data sets.
Yeah. I mean, I was speaking to a couple families this week, and that was this topic. I said, guys, you realize the landscape's going to change very quickly. When agentic AI is more prominent, that's going to be actually your main interface every day. It's not actually going to be maybe checking your email. It may not be logging into systems you think you log into right now normally. It's going to be dealing with your agentic AI and letting them do it. And that may be where you start your day. That may be where you're interacting the
Yeah.
heaviest, right? And then you still have these other things, but that agentic AI is going to change your experience. And it's going to change the way we operate too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Let's double click on that. So let's go through it. Like how is Sage leveraging AI right now? I know you got a bunch of new tools you're releasing. Maybe go through it. Let's talk about it. How are we simplifying
Yeah. So,
complex financial needs and
yep.
reporting compliance for family office, all that good stuff. How are you looking at it? What are you guys doing?
So there's a lot to this, and you're just gonna have to tell me when to stop.
Sure thing, you got it.
Right. So there's a number of themes here. So the first is that you know, off the shelf AI isn't really good enough
No,
for finance and
barely AI.
accounting.
Yeah.
It just doesn't achieve the level of accuracy that you need. And if you look at the large language models that power things like ChatGPT, they're brilliant. Don't get me wrong, they're magical, but they're also generalists. And so there are these huge brains with access to huge knowledge bases, and they're pretty good at a lot of things, but they're just not, they're not as good as we need them to be for the things specific to finance and accounting.
Right.
And so one of the things that we spend a lot of time on is developing our own AI models. And in some cases, these models are trained on an organization by organization basis. Right.
Oh, that's
So,
interesting. Okay.
you don't want a big model that learns from the masses to do the unique accounting that sits within a specific family office.
Particularly
Where
for
you've got
families, that matters because they all differ so much in how they execute their wealth, right? How they handle it. They do, right? There's a lot of variations there, and you're right. It wouldn't make sense to compare one against another because they're maybe doing something very different.
Right. So we do want these general models to all be sort of experts at accounting, right? To all be experts at compliance, right? And so it's a combination. So we've got a lot of models that are trained just on a company by company basis. And that's where their data is used in the training. And then we have these big large language models that understand accounting in general.
Yep.
Right. And we're providing, additional content in the form of how do our products work, how does the technology work behind the product, accounting, compliance and regulations, professional literature. One of the things we just announced as a partnership with the AICPA to train the professional literature into our own large language model with the expectation.
That's a smart move. Yeah, that's great. That's a great move.
Yeah. Yeah, we're pretty excited about it. And it's sort of the obvious, the obvious benefit of doing this is that we get, a brain, if you will, for these agents.
Yep.
That's just a better accountant, right? It's more professional, right? It just understands the job better. But instead of being a generalist that's good at lots of things that we don't care about, we don't care about whether it knows how to land an airplane, right?
Yeah, that's not relevant to this. Yeah.
Not relevant at all. We want it to understand the specific accounting treatments to an odd transaction.
Right.
And so if you look at the big off-the-shelf AI models, like the
Sure.
models powering ChatGPT, they might be 2 trillion parameters, whereas the models that we use for that brain are about 7 billion parameters. And the reason why that's relevant is that a 7 billion parameter model is faster, it's more efficient, it demands less energy, it's more predictable in the way that it works. And so it's more than just training these models to be expert. It's also fine-tuning them to be more efficient, predictable, performance, energy efficient,
It's kind of similar to a human, right? We're better when we focus on something. If we're spread too thin, you lose that ability to really make a bigger impact. But if you're focused, you can go further with something, right? And it's similar to that in nature. And yeah, the energy stuff, I don't know if we talk enough about that, by the way, because the energy toll on what we're building generally across the AI landscape is pretty significant.
Yeah.
It's absolutely
I mean, the math is straightforward there.
Yeah.
2 trillion to 7 billion, that's a 2000 to 7 difference in terms of energy consumption, because there's a direct correlation between the two.
Yep. And we don't even have enough on the planet to do that today. Yeah. So how do you
right? Yeah. There's a real scramble to build energy production right now. So that's kind of like the brains that we're building, right?
Yep.
And now with all those brains are going into two things. The first is Sage Copilot, which is this interactive assistant that does two things. It brings a new level of automation to workflows, but it also provides a way to interact with technology that's far more human, that's easier for everybody outside the accounting and finance team.
Why don't we explain a little more about Sage Copilot? I've seen a bit of it, and it does look pretty fascinating. Where would you put it, right? Is it closer to like a chat GPT type AI, or is it getting closer to agentic, or how do you slot that into the growth that you're looking to push through AI?
Yeah, so if we go back to the waves, Sage Copilot now gives us this conversational interface that's very similar to ChatGPT. But your conversations are going to be focused on what's happening in your world of accounting, right? What's happening in the systems where your workflow and your data reside. In the sense that it's agentic, Sage Copilot has access to tools to do things. So, for example, if you've, this probably applies less in the family office world, but if you've got a customer that owes you money and they haven't paid you yet, Sage Copilot will have access to tools to write an email and to sort of manage the interaction with a customer to perhaps accelerate the collection. There's other tools, right?
Yeah, no, but that's a great example of kind of leveraging time a little better for for any organization, really, not just family offices, but that allows you to go do other things where you're like, I don't want to chase this down all day. All right, well, let the AI go handle this stuff while I'm doing other things that maybe are higher priorities.
Yeah, exactly. And this, this isn't like we do one and then that's over and we do the next with agents.
Right.
Sage Copilot will become more agentic,
It'll be
right?
evolving into that. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so it'll take on more capability where it's working behind the scenes, where it's taken on more end-to-end responsibility, and there will still be that conversational interaction, but in many cases, if not most cases, it'll be prompted by Sage Copilot, not by the user. Through one of the agents that's running in the background, it may identify that there's a risk with the way something's trending in the organization, and it wants to prompt somebody on the finance team with, hey, I see this developing for this reason. Is there something you want to do about it? So that's where you're getting into that more agentic nature.
I
But
think it goes back
Sage
to when we
Copilot
talked about the term digital workers for a long time. People are like, oh, that seems silly. No, because this is where it's going. That's digital workers alerting you to an issue, just like a human worker would, right? No different.
yeah, I mean it's real.
Yeah, yeah,
This is the
so real.
world that we're starting to. We've sort of gotten through the hard stuff, right? We've had the technology breakthroughs that enable this to become a reality. What we're all focusing on right now is how do we sort of package it up and bundle it up and deploy it in a way that works the way the humans want it to work, right?
Right.
It works in a way that doesn't break trust with the human. I mean, the way that I'd like to describe it is, it doesn't matter how much you hand over to AI to automate something. At the end of the day, there's still going to be a human who's accountable, right?
Right.
So if AI makes a mistake on a bank reconciliation, whoever it is in the organization that owns bank reconciliation is still accountable. And so
Yeah,
that
it's not
that
the
that
AI who's going to have a reduction in pay or get in trouble or whatever it might be, right? It's not that.
yeah, it might be turned off, but
It might be turned off. That's the only thing you're going to do. Yeah.
right. But there's that's a really high bar actually. I was actually I was at a Google event a couple of weeks ago in London, and I was able to listen to the head of engineering for Waymo.
Okay.
And I forgot the gentleman's name, but he was describing the level of safety that they have to achieve with these self-driving cars. And they learned very early on that it's not enough to achieve the level of safety of sort of the normal human driver. They've got to be 100 times safer than a human driver for humans to accept them.
Right, just
And
to be
that's
accepting that change of how we operate. Yeah.
right. And so that's kind of similar to accounting. We've got to achieve it's not just the level of accuracy, but it's also the way you interact, right? How do you create an
Yeah.
experience in a way where the human still feels in control?
Yeah, it has to, because that's the only, you're right. That's about change management and adoption. And it's going to be really hard to do it without that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So it's exciting where you're taking Sage Copilot. Like I said, I've seen a little bit of it already, and it does seem game changer to me in terms of if you're used to working in any kind of general ledger system, this just makes things easier. It actually does support you and do day to day. But often what comes up when we start to mention this stuff is security, cybersecurity, and sensitivities around that, particularly in the family office space, given what we're talking about managing someone's wealth or family wealth, right? So how does Sage look at, I know you do this, but I'm going to play it up as an open question. How is Sage addressing cybersecurity? How do you look at that? Whether that's around data sovereignty, identity management, or there's a whole host of ways you can take it, but how do you guys look at it?
So there's a number of dimensions to this, and I can sort of respond in the affirmative that in my experience interacting with family offices, security and data privacy tends to rank pretty highly.
It comes up pretty quick and early.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, and they ask sophisticated questions.
Yes.
Yeah, these are not simple questions. So there's multiple dimensions to it. The first is that whether it's AI or sort of any other capability, we are subject to and we report on a number of regulations, where we have to be compliant, or we choose to be compliant in order to signal, a level of care and commitment to data privacy and data security, right?
Sure.
So SOC 2, for example, is important to us because yes, we have SOX regulated companies that use the product, but more broadly, if I can point to that to other organizations that are sensitive it's a good signal to them as well, right? So we have to do all those things. We also have to pay attention to, as you say, the data sovereignty, and different areas of the world have different rules around
That's what makes it
personally
tricky, right?
identifiable.
Yep.
Right. And so, the answer is, well, you have to it's got to be the union, right? I don't, it's a waste of my time and it's a terrible investment for me to, at every single thing that happens, say, hey, is this subject to California's Consumer Protection Act? If so, treat it a little differently, right? So it has to work over everything. Right. So those things still apply. But then you get into, well, what happens with your data as it relates to how we train the AI? And this is where we have to be very careful about two things. We've got to be transparent about how data is used, whether or not your data is in the training process. Where is that training happening? So, one of the things that's pretty obvious here is that nobody wants their data going off to a third party like
absolutely nobody wants that.
OpenAI, right? Nobody wants that, right? And so that's kind of a hard, fast rule for us, right? Customer data will never go to a third party model. So what really goes to the heart of that is a level of transparency in two ways. The first is being absolutely clear on how are we using your data? How are we keeping it private? If we are building AI ourselves or using third-party AI, and what role does your data play in the training? What compliance are we subject to? And can I commit to you that we are in fact compliant? What are the broader commitments we make to ethics and bias and safety in AI? And so one of the things that we announced a couple of weeks ago is what we call the AI trust label. So wherever we're using AI in one of our products, there'll be a little mark you can click, and it'll pop up something that looks like a nutrition label. That'll essentially tell you, here's how this AI is developed. Here's the models involved.
Pretty smart. It gives comfort. Yep.
Yeah, that transparency is everything. It's so key to all of this. So it's a combination of commitments. It's a lot of transparency, and then I guess the last thing that I would say there is that it's opt-in. So
that's a good point. You don't have to use it, and you don't have to do it this way. If you're not comfortable yet, you can essentially turn that feature off. Essentially, right? Okay.
Yeah, or not turn it on in the first place.
Right. And you can opt in later. I assume you can opt in later when maybe you decide, okay, let's try now.
Yeah, exactly.
So that brings up another topic, is because particularly in the family office space, we've talked about how, while there is some ubiquity across family offices at a base level, they do differ a lot in how they operate and how they approach the market and what their mission or vision is for what they're doing with their wealth. But so how do you balance that need for customized solutions with scalability and standardization? I mean, that's a constant fight anywhere, but particularly in the family office space, how do you look at it? How do you balance that? Because it comes up a lot at my end. It has to end up at your end as well.
Well, this is one of the most challenging and rewarding objectives of building products in this space, is that you simultaneously need to build a very, very scalable solution where you can take advantage of scaled economics by investing far more into security and data privacy, far more into the capabilities of the product, far more into performance and scalability than any individual organization can invest in, while at the same time creating this very open, configurable, customizable, extendable platform, right? That at the end of the day is the great balancing act.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And how we handle that is we have a partner ecosystem with partners like Armanino.
Right.
We create the tools, but we don't have any sort of illusion that we can then, after providing the software and the tools, go into every single organization and customize and extend and integrate in a bespoke way for everybody who wants to use it. And so the objective is to have this rich ecosystem to empower our partners with tools, and to it's really important that we look at it as a partnership, right? So most of our family offices customers come through us, to us through this ecosystem, right? And so this is what's that partnership provides the communication, the feedback that drives the roadmap.
Essential. Right.
Yeah, and one of the great things about it is the offices are generous and direct with their feedback.
Yeah, I found that to be very true as well, Aaron. Yes.
Yeah, and like honestly,
A good
it's a
thing.
gift.
Yeah, it is a
It's a
gift.
gift, right? You can get generous feedback, can get direct feedback that's not done in a helpful way, right? But when you've got, constructive relationship, it's really a brilliant partnership when you can find that.
I think so. And I think it's a testament to what you and the team there do because I've always felt, I've been interacting with you and your team for 6+ years now. And what I've always noticed is that feedback loop is alive and it's listened to. It's not just something we put in a piece of paper or on a website or whatever, or in a partnership document. It's actually like, oh, is that really a pain point? Okay, let's talk about how we then mutually go about figuring out how do we solve for that eventually.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that
exactly.
that has to be alive and active for this to actually be meaningful. And then, clients, family office, they pick up on that. They realize if the feedback's landing or not, right? And if not, they vote with their feet, and you don't want that. So I've always appreciated
And they
about
talk to each other too.
yeah, they do. It's a very easy space where they it's not competitive with each other, right? Because they're all on different missions. So they can easily talk to each other and it's not a problem. And they do. They spread that like wildfire. And if you're not minding it, they're gonna mind it for you. And
Yeah.
I just always appreciate I think you guys live true to that value. I think you do a good job with it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I know you'll let me know when we don't.
Yeah. Yeah, we're good about that too, aren't we? Yeah. But that's how these things are healthy, right? You have to have that healthy, open dynamic because in the end, we both, if you're looking at it from just Armanino and Sage perspective, we both want to make sure the family office is getting what they want in the end, right? That we're supplying the product and the services that are going to enrich what they're trying to do, right? And so,
Yep,
we're all rowing in the same direction, which is what makes it easy.
exactly.
Yeah. So we talked about agentic AI. Maybe we can go a little more deeply into that, or maybe you have another thing you want to go, but because I want to talk about what do you think that next big disruption is in the tech space? I mean, obviously my focus is family office here, but it could be generalist too. What do you see coming? Is it agentic AI the next thing you're saying, hey, that's the big disruptor, and let's go into that, or is there something else you're seeing too?
Wow.
I know it's a loaded question, Aaron. I'm giving you the big ones here.
Yeah. So I mean, the job of the CTO these days, in some ways, is more exciting than it's ever been
Yeah,
because the future feels closer than it ever has.
it really does. I agree. The speed is
Yeah.
picking up. Yeah, yeah,
The challenge is that as a CTO, it's your job to see the future. I was having a one-on-one with our CEO earlier this week, and one of the things I kind of confessed to him is that it's harder and harder to stay ahead. Whereas in the past I would operate 2 to 3 years out
yeah.
from where we were building technology. It's 6 months to a year now, and some of the big questions aren't necessarily now, what is this technology going to look like? Some of the big questions are, how is it going to change the way markets work? How is it going to change, who are the new players that are going to emerge, and what impact are they going to have in our world, right, in our technology world? And so, we're all trying to use our crystal balls to
That's the
see,
hard part.
yeah, how are these agents going to really take shape? Who are going to own them, and what's the scope going to be for these agents? How are people going to price for them? How are they going to get to a level of trust with the users? There's a bunch of philosophical questions that come up. At what point do these agents start to get the same rights as other employees in an organization?
Right.
Which sounds pretty science fictiony, but I
But
mean,
it's coming
you
though.
know,
Like, these questions are going to come and they're going to get bigger and louder. Yeah, I agree.
yeah. So, the big focus is agentic AI. One of the things that I think that we need to get back to a little bit is AI fundamentally accelerates work that's done the way humans work, right? There are still lots of things that should be redesigned from the ground up with taking the human out. And the
Yeah,
example that I give is, and this is less true in the US, but in many countries around the world, governments are driving a requirement to issue invoices electronically in such, over a network, where the government is a participant in the network. And if you think about the AI that we have to build to read an invoice, right? A lot of that comes from the fact that invoices are typically, on paper, might be a PDF, right? They're
right.
emailed to a human's, inbox. Then a human's got to read it, right? There's this big gap in the middle.
It's still
Well,
pretty
now
much a
if we've
legacy
done
process is what you're describing, right? We really haven't changed that.
right, and I can use AI to make this a lot faster,
Right, of course. Yeah.
right? But lot better if the two companies just connect on a network, right? And they exchange things directly where there's no need to use AI
There's
to
no need for a
analog to
PDF at that
digital.
point. You're just swapping the right data points around. Right.
Right. So that's an area I don't want us to lose focus on. And the other thing that I think is really important here is the concept of reliable, immutable, trusted technology like general ledgers. So
Yes.
if you think about this world where AI is doing a lot of the work,
Right.
can you imagine a CFO cares less about the audit trail, cares
No.
less about the controls that are ensuring,
They're going
data
to care more.
is
They have to make sure
they're
their
going to
jobs
care
are flawless.
more,
Yeah, they're going to care more.
right? So at the same time that we're making all these investments in AI and this agentic future,
Right.
we're simultaneously thinking through, okay, how do we take a general ledger, which is that trusted system of record, right? That trusted source of truth. How do we take it to this next level of trust
Right.
that lives up to this new AI era where it's harder to see what's happening, right? There's more of a need for trust.
Yeah.
So not exactly answering your question,
No, but you're talking
but I
about
think it brings some balance to this.
yeah, and I think it talks about the impact of that wave that you described coming. There's an impact that maybe we're not even thinking about, right? I'm sure most people aren't. But yeah, this is another factor you have to consider. In a lot of ways, like I hadn't thought about this, what you just said it, Aaron, but it made me think a lot of what we do in human work is linear, right? Linear processing, linear thinking. But a lot of what AI can do is nonlinear. It doesn't have to be a straight line because it can act in such fast multiple directions. And
Yeah.
in a way, I feel like that's what you described. It was like we have to almost at some point we're going to have to think a lot differently because the power of that technology is it doesn't have to mimic a linear process. It does today, but it doesn't actually have to.
Right.
Is that a fair way to kind of spin that back to you? Because that's what went through my head as you were saying. I was like, oh my God, we're describing basically nonlinear activity, and that's actually what these technologies can do. And that's really what you kind of almost described. Is that a fair way to kind of spin that back after what you said? Because that's what went through my head.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a completely different mindset if you're a developer these days, right? If you're writing software today, um, you're having to write code to handle every use case, to anticipate every potential outcome that you want,
Right.
and it's you have to have all the rules in place for that. When you're able to use AI when you're building something, this sort of pre-programmed way of thinking we have where everything is linear like that with
Right.
very predictable outcomes, it's very hard to sort of graduate from that into this world where, hey, wait a minute, I don't have to write the very explicit instructions and rules for this. At a higher level, I can say, here's sort of how I want you to behave. I don't need to tell you what the inputs and the outputs are.
Just go do it.
Go do it.
Right. And that's where it's heading. I mean, that's fascinating. It's going to change so many things in so many ways we operate today, not just obviously in the family office space, but pretty much everything. So this is great. So I know we're getting closer to the end of time here, and I know you got a busy day, so I'm gonna stay focused here for you. I love to end with I want a quotable from you. So you got to give me a quote, give me something you tell your team or you tell other people, you tell your family. Like give me a quote that you love to live by. Again, it could be any topic, I don't care, but give me something, Aaron. What do you got?
Yeah, so I mean, this one's probably not fun, but I think it's important. I built my career in Silicon Valley. That's where we started Intacct, and it was built sort of at the time that Facebook was rising, right? And the mantra of Silicon Valley at the time was move fast and break things. Right? We're probably half the people on the call are familiar, like have heard this, right? It's probably in The Social Network, the movie, right?
Right, yeah.
And we simply cannot operate by that mantra anymore in the world of AI. It was already problematic in the world of accounting and finance, right?
Right.
Like, I don't want to break your ability to issue financial
Accountants don't
reports,
typically
right?
like hearing that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we've got to replace move fast and break things with embracing humility and accepting accountability.
Oh, I like that.
Because, we're really at a stage now where customers will not buy AI unless they trust it, right? They won't use AI unless they trust it. And the biggest signal of trust to them is the company building it.
Yeah.
And so you have to embrace a completely different mindset in order to earn the trust that is required now to make that transition of, okay, I'm going to hand this thing over to AI and I'm just trusting, right?
Right.
I'm
I hope it
trusting that
goes
it's going
right.
to work.
Yeah, I like that. So embracing humility and accepting Say it again for me.
Responsibility.
Accepting responsibility.
Embracing humility and accepting responsibility.
I like it. All right. I'm going to propagate that here too. I'm going to take it. We're going to start pushing it over here.
Cool.
But I love it.
We still want to move fast.
Still want to move fast. No one says slow down.
Right.
No one says slow down.
Yeah. Right. But we need to do it responsibly.
Yeah. I think that makes a ton of sense given the era we're walking into now. So, well, Aaron, I want to thank you for taking the time today. This is fascinating. I always enjoy speaking with you, and I hope the audience is going to enjoy that today as well. So thank you for the time. Yeah, there's a lot of exciting things, and I feel like we're just kind of getting started with it.
Yep. Thanks for having me. It's always been a great relationship for me. And anytime you guys want to have part 2 of this conversation, let me know.
Awesome. All right. Well, audience, you heard that. We're going to have a part 2 coming up. So enjoy part 1. Thank you, everybody. John Stewart with Visions and Voices. Have a great day.